Hello. Another mysteries of today's science are diffraction, interference and the double slit experiment. For single slit we observe diffraction. For double slit we observe interference. What modern science tells us? Photon has wave properties, therefore it behaves as if it passes through two slits at the same time, interfere with itself, and we see a wave pattern as a result. If we try to check which slit particle went through, photon stops being a wave and becomes particle, and we see some kind of normal distribution. I heard this explanation so many times, again and again. But the issue is that it explains nothing. How photon can pass through two slits? What about locality? We always, I repeat, always observe photon as a particle and never as a wave. Particle being a wave is just physicist's interpretation of something that he does not see. I believe that there should be a local explanation on what happens there. And I believe that any real scientist should be interested in any local explanation even if he considers it strange. Because scientists don't have any local explanation at all. Something is better than nothing. Also, I will list some predictions at the end, so it can be checked if you wish. I will provide the explanation now, and if this local, clear, primitive, beautiful explanation of double slit experiment does not touch your heart, I just don't know what can touch it. In one of my previous videos I assumed that all physics is only extended statistics of matter movement. And wave is a distribution of such movement, when sequences of mutually exclusive events somehow cause each other. An example would be kinetic and potential energies for pendulum. Link to that video is in the upper right corner now. So I do believe that wave pattern does not exist in reality as a separate entity. Just the same way as normal distribution does not exist as a separate entity. Normal distribution appears only when there is a sequence of independent events happening one after another. The sum of all those events will cause normal distribution. The same way dependent events can create wave pattern. And because wave is a distribution, it appears in different situations. One of those situations is the double slit experiment. But that does not mean photon is a wave and passes through two slits. I can provide an analogy. The fact that the sum of coin tosses generates normal distribution and the fact that height of the population has normal distribution too, does not mean that human is a coin or that human consists of coins. So let's review the double slit experiment. We all know that light moves straight in vacuum. We also know that light can be reflected by matter. Slit consists of matter and slit's edges consist of matter too. So slit's edges have to reflect light in double slit experiment as well as in single slit experiment. Let's check what happens when you have only one edge. Not a slit, but only one edge of a razor. Let's point laser beam to that edge. If the razor is thin enough, you will clearly see a line that is perpendicular to an edge of a razor on the wall. In this particular example I used two non-parallel razors and as a result got two lines, perpendicular to each of razor edges that I point laser to. So what is this line? How is it explained from the particle as a wave point of view? For me it's some kind of reflection. Photons are reflected by razor, but because edge is thin enough, reflection looks this strange way. Only when we add the second edge of the slit, diffraction appears. So photons are being reflected by left edge, by right edge, and those reflections somehow conflict with each other and we see the diffraction pattern. In my example with non-parallel edges of razors you can see that sometimes the pattern appears and sometimes disappears. Depending on something that we have to find. What exactly is reflection? How does it happen? I will not describe the scientific explanation as it explains only that photon is a wave and therefore, that's not an explanation at all as for me. We know that any mass emits photons in all direction all the time. It's called thermal radiation. We see the slit edge, so we can be sure that it emits photons in our direction, as well as in any other direction. Do photons emitted by slit interact with photons emitted by us? In one of my previous videos I made an assumption that each particle consists of discrete pieces, quantums of energy, and interaction of particles happen when particles exchange those discrete pieces. That interaction causes Heisenberg's uncertainty principle per my assumption. Link to that video is in the upper right corner now. So I will assume that interaction between particles happens the described way. Photons are particles and there should be nothing special in their interaction. So yes, photons emitted by slit edge do interact with photons moving through a slit. So each time when photon from slit meets the photon we launched, some interaction happens. That updates the state of our photon. Then our photon meets another photon from slit and another photon from slit and another. And the result of all those interactions would be the updated direction of photons' movement, the reflection. If we have only one edge, that interaction with photons leads to normal behavior, normal distribution of possible photons' movement directions. When we add second edge, photons emitted by it update our photon some opposite way. And the result of that would be the wave-like distribution of possible photon movement directions. When slit edges are near enough to each other, interaction happens too often and we get a line with normal distribution, the same normal distribution that we saw for single razor edge. So what do we do when we add a second slit? We do the same thing, we add opposite razor edge. So per my assumptions the double slit experiment has no any difference with a single slit experiment. We just add matter that does not let the majority of photons pass. As a conclusion I can only repeat that per my assumptions diffraction and interference are not a result of some phase shift, but a result of mutually exclusive interactions with photons emitted by opposite slit edges. After interaction photon finds itself in a specific predictable state and can move only in specific directions with predictable probabilities. When we try to understand, through which slit photon has passed, the wave pattern disappears. That happens because we add observation device, for example glass. Observation destroys the predictable state of the photon and mutually exclusive events disappear. So that's my explanation of interference and diffraction. Can it be true? To prove that it can be true we just need to find an example of algorithm of photons interaction that leads to the appearance of these patterns. After trying maybe several dozens of different algorithms I found one that gives desirable pattern. I will not explain how it works now as it's definitely not the algorithm of everything, it fails in other situations. But it works for the diffraction and interference, so it proves that the correct interaction algorithm can exist and that we can try to find it in future. So here we see the first result of algorithm execution. All photons were launched from upper left corner in the same direction and with the same properties except initial position. Initial positions differ several pixels to create a beam of light effect. As photons move, their state is updated by two sources that emulate the edges of slits. As a result we see maximums and minimums of density. Photons prefer some directions of movement over others. You can see central maximum and maximums on each side of it. Let's call it diffraction. Here is another result of algorithm execution. I added two more edges on each side of existing edges and that updated the pattern. Central maximum got additional maximums inside of it. Let's call it interference. Now let's see what happens if we increase the distance between the edges. Let's start with two edges. Distance between the maximums now appears to be smaller, just as it happens in reality when we increase the width of the slit. Additional edges give us additional maximums inside central maximum. As you can clearly see, the distance between maximums changed. So at least in some aspects the given algorithm matches what we see in physics and I think it means that the real algorithm can exist too. I will provide the details of the algorithm in future videos. Maybe by that time I will understand those details myself. Haha. But in short it should appear to be connected with electromagnetic rotations in opposite directions. Passing photon can be charged positively or negatively by photon from one of the edges. It will make him rotate in one direction. If after that passing photon is neutralized by photon from the same edge, we get normal behavior. But if it's neutralized by photon from opposite edge, that cancels some of the directions of movement. Something like that. So per my assumptions, interference and diffraction are caused by the photons of the slit. And we can check that using at least two different approaches. 1. Heat up the material of the slit. The density of emitted photons will increase, and that should affect the wave pattern. If photon is just a wave interacting with itself, I don't see how the pattern would depend on the temperature of the slit material. 2. Maybe it's possible to create the double slit experiment without the second slit, just by adding rasers, sources of photons. We can also say that interference and diffraction are actually observations. Slit photons observe photons emitted by us and updates their states and direction in a specific way. As you can see, we recreated the mysterious behavior of photon without any mysteries, using simple assumption that this world is a discrete 3D robot that consists of discrete machines, quantums of energy. Imagine how much could be done if we had the algorithm of universe. It would be the real philosopher's stone. Otherwise we will hear again and again that this world is illogical and unexplainable, when it is absolutely logical and can be explained easily. Again and again we will hear nonsense about photon that is aware, whether it will be observed or not. Photon that decides whether to be a wave or a particle depending on that. Thank you for your attention.